I really believed they changed. That's the part that still bothers me sometimes. Not because I was naive, not because I ignored the red flags, but because this time it looked different, calmer, softer, more self aware. There were no explosive fights anymore, no obvious manipulation, no cold disappearances. In fact, for a while, it felt healthier than ever. And that's exactly why I almost missed it again. Because the most dangerous patterns don't return looking identical. They return improved, more subtle, more adaptive, more believable. That's what nobody tells you about narcissistic cycles. The second version is usually harder to detect than the first, because now they know what pushed you away before. And once someone understands your boundaries, they can learn how to approach them more carefully. That's why the comeback feels different. Not because the intention changed, because the strategy evolved. And honestly, that realization hit me harder than the original manipulation ever did. Because this time, I had hope, real hope. I thought maybe losing me forced self-awareness. Maybe the silence changed them. Maybe the distance created reflection, and slowly, I started reopening emotional access. Not all at once, little by little. That's how it happens. Nobody falls back into the cycle instantly. It happens through tiny emotional permissions. One conversation, one vulnerable moment, one, maybe this time is different. And what made it even harder to detect was that some things actually did improve. That's the confusing part. People think manipulation always looks fully fake, but sometimes real effort exists inside toxic patterns. Temporary effort, strategic effort, fear-based effort, but not sustainable transformation. And if you don't understand that distinction, you'll mistake temporary improvement for permanent change. That's exactly what happened to me. At first, they listened more, reacted less aggressively, communicated differently. They seemed calmer emotionally, more patient, more emotionally aware, and because of that, my guard slowly dropped. Not consciously, neurologically. That's how trauma bonds work. Your nervous system responds to relief before your logic fully catches up. And when chaos suddenly becomes calm, your brain interprets that as safety, even if the foundation underneath hasn't actually changed. That's why toxic cycles are so difficult to leave emotionally, because the contrast itself becomes addictive. Pain, relief, distance, connection, coldness, warmth. Your nervous system starts associating emotional inconsistency with love. So when the good version of them reappears, it feels powerful. Not because it's healthy, because it interrupts pain temporarily. And temporary relief can feel incredibly convincing when you've been emotionally exhausted long enough. That's why I ignored the small sign at first. The tiny moments where the old pattern quietly resurfaced. Not loudly, subtly. A dismissive comment hidden inside a joke. A slight shift in tone when attention wasn't centered on them. Tiny guilt tactics disguised as vulnerability. Small emotional punishments when boundaries appeared. At first, they seemed insignificant, easy to rationalize, easy to excuse. And honestly, part of me wanted to excuse them. Because once you emotionally invest in the idea that someone changed, your brain starts protecting that belief. That's what makes the second cycle so dangerous. You're not just attached to the person anymore. You're attached to the possibility, the redemption story, the happy ending, the version where all the pain finally meant something. And that emotional investment blinds people, especially people with empathy, because empathetic people naturally search for progress, potential, growth, That's why narcissistic cycles often trap self-aware people repeatedly. So not because they're weak, because they keep seeing glimpses of the person they hoped existed all along. And those glimpses feel real. That's the hardest part. Sometimes they are real in the moment, but consistency reveals truth more than isolated moments ever will. That realization changed everything for me. I stopped focusing on isolated emotional moments and started watching patterns over time. That's when the illusion started collapsing. Because healthy change becomes consistent under pressure. Manipulation changes only when control feels threatened. And once I noticed that difference, I couldn't unsee it anymore. The kindness disappeared whenever accountability appeared. The patience disappeared whenever boundaries strengthened. The emotional awareness disappeared whenever they stopped feeling in control. That's when I finally understood something painful. They didn't become emotionally healthier, they became strategically calmer. There's a difference, and that difference can save years of your life emotionally. Because strategic calm still revolves around control. It's simply packaged differently. Less chaos, more subtlety, less explosion, more emotional positioning. That's why people often say, but this time feels different. And sometimes it does feel different. That's what makes it dangerous. Because obvious manipulation is easier to escape. Subtle manipulation keeps you psychologically negotiating with yourself. You stop asking, is this toxic? And start asking, am I overreacting? That internal confusion is where the cycle survives the longest. Because confusion creates hesitation, and hesitation delays boundaries. That's why narcissistic patterns rarely depend entirely on control through fear. The stronger mechanism is control through ambiguity, keeping you emotionally uncertain, emotionally analyzing, emotionally invested in decoding behavior. And once I saw that clearly, the emotional dynamic changed permanently for me. Because now, instead of reacting emotionally to isolated moments, I started observing consistency, patterns, repetition, timing, and patterns never lie for long. That's the thing about unhealthy dynamics. Eventually, the mask slips under pressure, always. Not because people can't temporarily perform healthier behavior, but because sustainable emotional change requires something deeper than fear of losing someone. It requires accountability, self-confrontation, empathy, internal responsibility. And without those things, the old mechanisms always return eventually. Maybe softer, maybe slower, maybe more disguised, but they return. That's why the phrase, "I thought they changed," hurts so deeply, because it usually means I allowed myself to hope again. And losing hope the second time feels different. The first heartbreak destroys attachment. The second one destroys illusion. And honestly, that second realization changed me more than the breakup itself. Because now, I wasn't grieving the relationship anymore. I was grieving the fantasy that one day the pattern would finally become love. That realization is brutal, but it's also freeing, because once you stop chasing potential, you start seeing reality more clearly. And reality reveals things emotions often hide, like how temporary improvements always appeared when distance increased, how emotional warmth intensified when access weakened, how understanding appeared strongest when consequences became real. That's not transformation, that's adaptation. And adaptation without accountability is still manipulation, just more refined. Once I understood that, the emotional hooks stopped landing the same way. Not immediately, but gradually. Like waking up from something. Suddenly, I noticed how often I had abandoned my own intuition just to preserve hope. How often I ignored discomfort because I wanted the story to end differently. How often I confused temporary emotional relief with genuine safety. That awareness hurt, but it also gave me clarity I never had before. Because now I understood why the pattern kept repeating. I kept focusing on moments instead of consistency. Moments can be performed. Consistency reveals identity. That sentence changed my life. Because once you stop analyzing emotional moments in isolation, the cycle becomes much easier to recognize. You stop asking, "What did they say?" and start asking, "What consistently happens over time?" That question exposes everything, and eventually, it exposed the truth I was trying so hard not to see. The pattern had returned. Not identically, more intelligently, more subtly, more carefully. But underneath it all, the emotional structure was exactly the same. Control, confusion, intermittent validation, emotional instability, strategic closeness, fear of abandonment disguised as love. Once I saw that clearly, something inside me finally detached. Because now, I wasn't responding to promises anymore. I was responding to patterns. And patterns tell the truth people try to hide. That's why awareness changes everything. Because once you see the cycle clearly, the emotional fantasy starts losing its power. Not because you stop caring instantly, but because you finally stop confusing temporary change with permanent transformation. And that distinction can save you from repeating the same emotional story for years.